The quiet of a Sunday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, held the kind of peace that felt almost sacred. It was June 8th, just after 9 o'clock, and the sun hung low over the exclusive enclave of Elmwood Estates, casting long golden shadows across stone mansions and perfectly tended lawns. Underground sprinklers clicked in steady rhythm. The air smelled of cut grass, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of early hydrangeas. In this pocket of old money and quiet power, just outside Washington, D.C., trouble was supposed to be something that happened to other people. Director Harlan J. Whitaker had come to guard these rare Sunday mornings like precious currency. At 58, with a career that had carried him from the streets of Atlanta through the highest levels of federal law enforcement, he knew how quickly the world could tilt into crisis. National security briefings, congressional hearings, decisions that could alter the course of investigations into terrorism or corruption. All of it waited for him. But on Sundays, before the encrypted phone inevitably rang, he was simply a man in his garden. He stood at the end of his long driveway in faded gray sweatpants, scuffed sneakers, and a well-worn Georgetown University sweatshirt, the green garden hose steady in his hands. Silver hair caught the light. His broad shoulders still carried the quiet strength of the field agent he had once been. The water soaked into the soil around his prize hydrangeas, and for a few stolen minutes, the weight of the badge he carried every other day of the week lifted. 2 blocks away, a Montgomery County police cruiser turned onto the street. Behind the wheel sat Officer Brandon Tate, 28 years old and burning with the kind of ambition that outran his judgment. He had a reputation in the department for being proactive, a word that often served as cover for the complaints that followed him. Complaints about aggressive stops, unnecessary force, and a habit of seeing threats where others saw ordinary citizens. His partner, Officer Patrick Sullivan, a 15-year veteran with a wife and 2 children at home, sat in the passenger seat nursing lukewarm coffee and counting the hours until he could clock out. Tate's fingers tapped the steering wheel. "Look at this place. These people have everything. Makes them soft. Makes them targets." Sullivan took a slow sip. "Or it makes them people who pay a lot of taxes and expect us not to harass their neighbors. Just drive, Brandon." The cruiser rounded the bend. Tate's eyes locked on a tall black man in casual clothes standing beside a large brick mailbox at the end of a sweeping driveway. The house behind him was a stone colonial that easily cleared $6 million. The man held a thick Sunday newspaper under one arm and moved with the unhurried calm of someone who belonged exactly where he stood. Tate eased off the gas. "What do we have here?" Sullivan looked up. "That's the Whitaker place. The guy lives there. Leave it alone." But Tate was already pulling to the curb, his pulse quickening with the familiar rush of a potential collar. "He doesn't look like he belongs. Old clothes, no car in the drive, just standing there like he's checking to see who's home. Classic casing." Before Sullivan could argue, Tate was out of the cruiser, boots heavy on the pristine concrete, hand resting on his utility belt. He adjusted his sunglasses and strode up the driveway with the swagger of a man who believed the badge made him judge, jury, and executioner. Whitaker heard the footsteps and turned. He offered a polite, neighborly nod, the newspaper still tucked under his arm. "Good morning, officer," he said, in a deep, resonant baritone that carried natural authority. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Step away from the mailbox," Tate barked, voice sharp and devoid of courtesy. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Whitaker's polite smile faded into calm assessment. Over 3 decades in federal law enforcement, he had seen every variety of human behavior. He recognized the puffed chest and aggressive posture instantly, the universal language of an insecure officer hunting for confrontation. "I live here," Whitaker said simply. "I'm just getting my paper." "I said step away and keep your hands visible," Tate snapped, closing the distance. "Do you have identification on you?" "My wallet is inside the house," Whitaker replied, tone level. "I stepped out to water the garden. If you'll give me a moment, I can retrieve it." You're not going anywhere. Tate reached out, grabbed Whitaker's right arm, and twisted it hard behind his back. The cuffs locked on too tightly, biting into skin. Whitaker's muscles tensed for a fraction of a second, then relaxed under iron discipline. He knew better than to resist a local patrolman, especially one this volatile. He let his arm be pulled back, the newspaper falling to the driveway. Officer Sullivan jogged up, face tight with alarm. "Brandon, ease up. He's not fighting you. He's refusing to identify and trespassing on private property," Tate declared, already reaching for his radio. "This is how we keep a neighborhood like this clean." Whitaker stood perfectly still, hands bound behind him, and looked directly into Tate's eyes. His voice dropped into a register that carried the chill of absolute certainty. "Officer," he said softly, "I will not resist you, but I am telling you exactly once. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Remove these cuffs now, and we can both pretend this never happened." Tate smirked and shoved him toward the cruiser. "Save it for the judge, buddy. You're under arrest." The back seat of the cruiser smelled of stale fast food and industrial cleaner. Whitaker sat rigidly, broad shoulders forced forward by the tight metal. Through the plexiglass divider, he studied the back of Tate's head with the icy detachment that had made him a legendary investigator. He was not angry. Anger was inefficient in a crisis. Instead, he felt a profound clinical disappointment. He had spent his career trying to elevate standards of policing across the country. Yet here he was, detained by an arrogant rookie operating on unchecked prejudice. He mentally cataloged every violation: no probable cause, no Miranda warning, excessive force, complete failure to verify identity. He decided against revealing who he was just yet. If Tate panicked, the situation could escalate. Better to let the process play out in a secure, recorded environment where every word would be documented. 10 minutes later, the cruiser pulled into the rear lot of the Bethesda precinct, a sturdy brick building that had stood since the late 70s. Tate parked, yanked the rear door open, and grabbed Whitaker by the bicep. "Out!" Whitaker stepped into the bright morning sun with graceful balance despite the cuffs. He stood 3 inches taller than Tate, a physical fact that clearly irritated the younger man. Tate pushed him toward the heavy steel doors. Inside, the booking area hummed with low-level Sunday activity. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Sergeant Raymond O'Malley sat at the elevated desk, a red-faced veteran with a thick mustache and tired eyes. Tate shoved Whitaker forward. "Look what I caught creeping around Elmwood Estates. Refused to identify, trespassing, resisting." O'Malley looked down, chewing gum slowly. He studied Whitaker's calm face, the gray sweatpants, the Georgetown hoodie. "No ID?" he asked. "Claimed it was inside the house," Tate sneered. "Claimed he owned the place. $6 million estate, Sarge. Guy must think we're idiots." "Empty your pockets," O'Malley instructed. "My hands are cuffed behind my back, Sergeant," Whitaker replied evenly. His voice cut through the room like a blade. Several officers looked up. There was an unmistakable cadence of command in his tone. O'Malley frowned at the tight cuffs. "Tate, take the bracelets off. Empty his pockets." Tate hesitated, then unlocked them. Whitaker brought his arms forward slowly, deliberately rubbing his raw wrists so the red welts showed clearly to the desk cameras. He placed a single brass house key on the counter. Nothing else. "No wallet, no phone," Tate noted triumphantly. "Who walks around with no phone?" "A man watering his own garden on a Sunday morning," Whitaker stated, looking straight into O'Malley's eyes. "Sergeant, your officer assaulted me on my own property. I am respectfully requesting my phone call, and I suggest you preserve the dash cam footage from Officer Tate's vehicle immediately." O'Malley stopped chewing. A cold prickle of unease climbed his spine. The man before him was far too calm. He used words like preserve dash cam footage with the casual fluency of a seasoned prosecutor. Tate scoffed. "Listen to this guy. Thinks he's a lawyer now. Go ahead, make your call. Call your public defender." "Give him the phone, Brandon," O'Malley ordered quietly, eyes never leaving Whitaker. Tate shoved the heavy desk phone across the counter. Whitaker picked up the receiver with a steady hand. He did not need to look up a number. He had the direct encrypted line of Deputy Director Samuel Brooks memorized. He dialed smoothly. The phone rang twice. "Brooks." "Sam," Whitaker said calmly, turning slightly away from the desk. "It's Harlan. I'm at the local police precinct in Bethesda. I have been arrested." A fraction of silence. Then Brooks's tone shifted entirely. "Sir, you're on an unsecure line. Are you injured?" "I am physically fine. I was detained outside my home. Unlawful detainment. Excessive force. No Miranda. I need you to assemble the regional quick response team. Come to the Bethesda station. Bring legal counsel. Bring internal affairs. And Sam?" "Yes, Director. Bring everyone." Whitaker hung up and pushed the phone back across the desk. He looked at Tate and offered a small, chilling smile. "He's on his way." The holding cell smelled of cheap bleach and years of desperation. Tate shoved Whitaker inside and slammed the bar shut with a harsh clang. "Make yourself comfortable, pal," Tate sneered. "Your buddy's going to need a lot of cash to bond you out. Burglary tools, resisting, trespassing, failure to identify." Whitaker stood in the center of the cell, then turned his gaze on the younger man. He took one slow step toward the bars. His voice dropped into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "Officer Tate, do you have a pension plan? A 401k? Because I highly recommend you start looking into private sector employment. Though given the federal indictments you will be facing by sundown, finding a job with a felony conviction will be exceedingly difficult." "Are you threatening a police officer?" Tate demanded, color rising in his face. "I am stating a simple, inevitable fact," Whitaker replied, turning his back and sitting gracefully on the metal bench. He folded his hands in his lap and looked straight ahead, effectively dismissing the officer from existence. Tate spat a curse and stormed out. At the booking desk, the atmosphere had changed completely. O'Malley's face had drained of color. His hand trembled on the mouse as he stared at the glowing screen. He had pulled up the county property records for 442 Elmwood Drive. Owner, Harlan J. Whitaker. Assessed value, $6.2 million. Then he had searched the name in the national database. The screen flashed a bright yellow warning. Restricted file. Clearance level 9 required. Contact Department of Justice secure line. O'Malley minimized the window, opened a browser, and typed the name. The first result was an official .gov biography. The high-resolution portrait showed the man currently sitting in cell number 2, wearing a sharp navy suit, looking distinguished and utterly authoritative. Beneath the image were 5 words that made O'Malley feel as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Tate strode back in, still riding the high of his imagined bust. Guy in the back is delusional, making threats about federal indictments. I'm tagging a terroristic threats charge onto his sheet. O'Malley slowly turned the monitor around. "Derek, Brandon, look at the screen. Look at his face." Tate leaned in. He read the name. He read the title. The blood vanished from his face. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the linoleum. "No," he whispered, stumbling backward. "No, that's impossible. He was wearing sweatpants. He didn't look like he belonged in that neighborhood," Sullivan finished quietly, voice thick with disgust. "I told you to leave him alone." Outside, the morning stillness shattered. A low, deep rumble vibrated through the floorboards. Not the high whine of police sirens, but the heavy synchronized roar of massive armored diesel engines. 8 black unmarked Chevrolet Suburbans screeched to a halt, forming a barricade that boxed in every local cruiser. Behind them, 2 armored Lenco Bearcats idled aggressively, their tires crushing the manicured curbs. Doors flew open. More than 40 heavily armed federal agents poured into the street with terrifying silent precision. They wore full tactical armor, Kevlar helmets, and olive drab windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across back and chest in bold yellow lettering. They carried short-barreled M4 carbines held at the low ready. Snipers took positions on the roof of the dental clinic across the street, long rifles trained on the precinct doors. A voice boomed over a bullhorn. "This is the FBI. The building is secured. No one leaves." Inside, O'Malley's voice was tight with desperation. "Put your hands on the desk, Brandon. Do not touch your weapon. If they think we're a threat, they will level this building." The heavy double-glass doors were yanked open. A dozen tactical agents flooded the lobby, fanning out with lethal efficiency, securing exits, hallways, and the armory. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them. Nobody move." Tate was hyperventilating. Two agents grabbed him, spun him around, and stripped his duty belt, service weapon, and badge, tossing them to the floor. Through the corridor of armed agents strode Deputy Director Samuel Brooks, suit jacket unbuttoned, eyes burning with fury. Special Agent in charge. Victor Lang flanked him. Brooks marched straight to the booking desk and slammed his hand down. "I am Deputy Director Samuel Brooks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are holding Director Harlan J. Whitaker. If a single hair on his head has been harmed, I will personally see to it that everyone in this building is charged with federal kidnapping under Title 18. "Where is he?" "He's in holding cell 2, sir," O'Malley stammered. "He's completely unharmed. It was a terrible mistake." "Give me the keys," Lang snapped, snatching the ring from O'Malley's trembling hand. Brooks, Lang, and a tight protective detail of 4 SWAT operators marched down the narrow hallway. They reached cell 2. Whitaker was still sitting on the metal bench exactly as he had been left, hands folded in his lap, expression tranquil. He looked up as the door slid open. "Director, are you injured?" Lang asked. "I am fine, Victor," Whitaker said, standing smoothly and smoothing the wrinkles from his faded sweatshirt. He looked at Brooks. "Thank you for the prompt response, Sam." "What happened?" Brooks asked, fury softening into relief. "What you walked into, Sam, is a textbook example of why our Civil Rights Division is currently backed up with systemic reform cases," Whitaker replied coolly. He stepped out of the cell. The federal agents parted respectfully. "Let's go clear this up." Whitaker walked back into the main booking area. The room was frozen. Federal agents held the perimeter. O'Malley and Sullivan stood behind the desk, pale and terrified. In the center, surrounded by SWAT operators, stood Brandon Tate, stripped of weapon, badge, and unearned authority, looking exactly like what he was, a frightened bully who had finally picked a fight with a mountain. Whitaker walked slowly toward him, sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. He stopped 2 feet away. Tate could not meet his eyes. "Sir, Director, I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Whitaker repeated, voice smooth and devastating. "That is the crux of the issue, Officer Tate. You didn't know if I owned that home. You didn't know my name. You didn't bother to ask for verification. You didn't bother to investigate before using force. You looked at a black man in a wealthy neighborhood, and your prejudice made your decisions for you. You thought you were above the law because you wore a badge. But let me make this abundantly clear to you." Whitaker gestured to the heavily armed agents, the armored vehicles outside, the crushing weight of the United States government that had descended on the station. "You do not own the law. We do. And as of this exact second, your career in law enforcement is permanently over." Whitaker turned to Brooks. "Sam, call the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Have them send a federal investigative team. I want every arrest Officer Tate has made over the last 5 years audited. I want this entire precinct reviewed for civil rights violations." "Yes, Director." Whitaker looked at Tate one last time. "You thought you were making a major bust today. You were right. You just busted yourself." He turned on his heel and walked toward the glass doors, the sea of federal agents parting to let him into the sunlight. Chief of Police Thomas Henderson was on the second hole at the Bethesda Country Club, when his encrypted phone vibrated violently. He expected a noise complaint or a minor traffic incident involving a city councilman's teenager. Instead, the mayor's voice cracked with panic. "Tommy, get your golf shoes off and get down to the precinct right now. Every news chopper on the East Coast is hovering over your station. The FBI just raided our police department." Henderson dropped his 9-iron. "Mr. Mayor, slow down. One of your idiot patrolmen arrested the director of the FBI in his own driveway this morning. Put him in cuffs, threw him in a cell. Get down there before the Department of Justice dissolves our entire city charter." The drive that usually took 20 minutes took Henderson 7. When he turned onto the street leading to the precinct, his stomach dropped. The mayor had not exaggerated. The street was barricaded by federal tactical vehicles. A perimeter of heavily armed SWAT operators held back a swelling crowd of civilians and news crews. 3 news helicopters circled overhead. Henderson sprinted toward the perimeter, flashing his badge. The federal agents barely parted to let him through. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Brooks stood by the booking desk, speaking quietly into a satellite phone. Lang leaned over the counter, glaring down at O'Malley. Henderson pushed through the doors, out of breath and sweating through his polo shirt. "Who is in charge here?" "I am," he managed. "Chief Thomas Henderson. Where is Director Whitaker? I need to personally apologize." "The director has left the premises," Brooks interrupted, snapping his phone shut. "He has no interest in your apologies, Chief Henderson. He is interested in accountability, and as of this moment, your department is under a sweeping federal microscope." Henderson looked around. In the corner, stripped of duty belt, badge, and firearm, sat Officer Brandon Tate, head buried in his hands, shoulders shaking. Standing beside him, looking utterly defeated, was Officer Patrick Sullivan. Henderson turned to O'Malley. "What exactly happened?" O'Malley could not meet his eyes. "Tate grabbed a guy outside a mansion on Elmwood, said he fit the profile of a burglar, ignored the guy when he said he lived there, cuffed him, brought him in. We didn't run the name until he was in the cage. He was watering his flowers." Brooks's voice was venom. "Your man assaulted the chief law enforcement officer of the United States government because he didn't believe a black man could own a house in this zip code." Henderson felt his knees weaken. The liability, the lawsuits, the unimaginable public relations disaster. It was a career-ending meteor strike. He turned his fury on Tate. "Stand up," he roared. "Stand up, Tate." Tate rose slowly, tears streaming down his face. "Chief, I swear he was acting suspicious. He wouldn't show me his ID. I was just following proactive patrol guidelines." "Shut your mouth," Henderson screamed. "You are stripped of all police powers immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending termination. And God help me, if the union tries to fight this, I will personally burn this precinct to the ground." "The union won't be an issue," Brooks stated coldly. He nodded to 2 towering FBI agents. "Officer Brandon Tate, you are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for violations of Title 18, United States Code Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are also being charged with federal kidnapping and battery of a federal official." Tate gasped, stumbling backward until he hit the concrete wall. "No, wait, I'm a cop. You can't do this." "You aren't a cop anymore, Brandon," Lang said, stepping forward with heavy federal handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The irony was thick and absolute. In the exact same room where Tate had strutted proudly an hour earlier, boasting about his major collar, he was now forcibly spun around. The federal agents locked steel cuffs tightly around his wrists. "Chief, please do something," Tate begged. Henderson simply turned his back. "Process him," Lang ordered, "and put him in holding cell 2. I want him to sit on the exact same bench he forced the director to sit on." Tate sobbed openly as the agents marched him down the familiar cinder block hallway. The heavy metal bars of cell 2 screeched open. He was shoved inside. The door slammed shut with deafening finality. Tate collapsed onto the cold metal bench, burying his face in his cuffed hands as the reality of his shattered life finally crushed him. 72 hours later, Wednesday morning, June 11th, the Bethesda precinct was unrecognizable. The lobby had been converted into a makeshift federal command center. Desks were pushed together and covered in laptops, secure servers, and mountains of printed case files. The Department of Justice had dispatched a specialized civil rights investigative team led by Special Agent Rebecca Shaw, a methodical and terrifyingly brilliant investigator who specialized in dismantling corrupt police departments. She did not yell. She simply dug until she found the rotting foundation. And in Bethesda, she did not have to dig very deep. Whitaker's directive had been clear. Audit every single arrest Brandon Tate had made over his 3-year career and review the supervisors who signed off on his reports. Shaw sat at the head of the conference room table, a thick manila folder under her folded hands. Across from her sat Officer Patrick Sullivan, looking 10 years older than he had on Sunday. He had voluntarily surrendered his badge and was cooperating fully, desperate to secure an immunity deal and save his pension. "Officer Sullivan," Shaw began, voice crisp and professional. "We have spent the last 3 days reviewing Officer Tate's arrest records. It seems he had an extraordinarily high rate of confiscating cash during traffic stops and pedestrian checks." Sullivan swallowed hard. "Brandon was aggressive. He targeted certain demographics. We all knew it. If a minority drove a nice car through the wrong neighborhood, Brandon would pull them over for failing to signal. He'd claim he smelled marijuana to get probable cause. And during those searches," Shaw opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. "He frequently utilized civil asset forfeiture, claiming the cash he found was tied to illicit activities, even without a drug conviction." Sullivan nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. He'd seize the money, tell the suspects if they fought it, he'd hit them with felony distribution charges. Most people just walked away, happy not to go to jail." Shaw leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Here is where the math stops working, Officer Sullivan. According to the property room logs, Tate seized over $200,000 in cash over the last 3 years. But our forensic accountants have audited the precinct's forfeiture accounts. Only $40,000 was ever deposited." Sullivan's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Wait, what are you saying?" "I am saying," Shaw corrected sharply, "that Brandon Tate wasn't just a racist, overzealous cop. He was a thief. He was using his badge to systematically extort innocent citizens, fabricating probable cause, stealing their money, and pocketing the difference." And Sergeant O'Malley was signing off on the heavily redacted property reports. The twist hit the precinct like a secondary explosion. The bad arrest of the FBI director had not been merely a catastrophic mistake. It had been an attempted robbery. Tate had seen a black man at a $6 million estate and assumed he was either a criminal carrying illicit cash or a wealthy target who could be easily intimidated and shaken down. He had tried his usual extortion playbook on the absolute worst possible target on the planet. Down in the federal detention center in Alexandria, Virginia, the walls were closing in. Shaw walked into the bleak interview room carrying a fresh stack of indictments. Tate wore a bright orange federal jumpsuit, face pale, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. He looked completely broken. "Agent Shaw," he croaked, "my lawyer said we might be able to work out a plea for the civil rights charge. I'll resign. I'll never work in law enforcement again. I just want to avoid federal prison." Shaw did not smile. She pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed the thick stack of documents on the metal table. "Mr. Tate, the civil rights charge regarding Director Whitaker is the least of your problems right now." Tate frowned. "What do you mean?" "We audited your forfeiture logs," Shaw stated, voice cold as ice. "We found the offshore accounts you opened in the Cayman Islands. We found the $75,000 hidden in the drywall of your garage. We have sworn statements from 14 different victims you illegally detained and robbed under the threat of fabricated felony charges. Tate stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast, Shaw thought he might pass out. You thought you were untouchable because you hid behind a badge, Shaw continued, leaning across the table. You targeted marginalized people because you thought they didn't have the power to fight back. But then you got greedy. You got arrogant. You walked up a driveway in Elmwood Estates and tried to run your extortion game on Harlan J. Whitaker. I didn't know, Tate stammered, mind short-circuiting. I know you didn't, Shaw said coldly. And that is exactly why karma has caught up to you with such devastating precision. We are amending your charges, Mr. Tate. You are no longer just facing a civil rights violation. We are charging you with 14 counts of extortion under color of official right, grand larceny, wire fraud, and federal racketeering. Tate began to hyperventilate, gripping the edges of the metal table. Racketeering? That's a RICO charge. That's for the mob. You operated a criminal enterprise using a police cruiser, Shaw replied evenly, standing and gathering her folders. The maximum penalty for your combined charges is roughly 120 years in a federal penitentiary. The Department of Justice will not be offering you a plea deal. We are going to make a spectacular national example out of you. She walked to the heavy steel door and knocked twice for the guard. She looked back over her shoulder at the ruined man sobbing violently into his orange sleeves. Director Whitaker sends his regards, she said quietly. He suggested I remind you to check your pension plan, because where you're going, you won't be needing it. The heavy door slammed shut, echoing down the bleak corridor. 6 months later, the media circus surrounding the United States District Court in downtown Washington, D.C., was unlike anything the city had seen in a decade. News vans lined the streets for blocks. Reporters camped on the courthouse steps. The trial of former officer Brandon Tate had become a national spectacle, a glaring spotlight on the abuse of power and the swift, unforgiving hammer of federal justice. Inside the grand oak-paneled courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Tate sat at the defense table, a hollow shell of the arrogant bully who had strutted up a Bethesda driveway half a year earlier. He drowned in an ill-fitting gray suit, face gaunt, eyes darting nervously. Lead prosecutor Claire Bennett stood before the jury box, voice ringing with clear, undeniable authority. She had spent the last 3 days methodically parading Tate's past victims before the court. 14 different citizens, teachers, nurses, construction workers, a black physician, a Latino contractor, had bravely taken the stand. They told chillingly similar stories of being pulled over, intimidated, threatened with fabricated drug charges, and robbed of their hard-earned cash by the man sworn to protect them. But the final nail came when the prosecution called their star witness. A heavy silence fell as Director Harlan J. Whitaker walked through the polished wooden doors. He wore a pristine charcoal suit, posture immaculate, radiating the quiet, absolute power of the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He did not look at Tate as he walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. When Whitaker sat down, Prosecutor Bennett approached the podium. Director Whitaker, could you please recount the events of that Sunday morning at your residence in Elmwood Estates? Whitaker spoke with clinical, devastating precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He simply laid out the unvarnished facts, the lack of probable cause, the immediate resort to physical force, the refusal to verify identity, and the racial profiling that had driven the entire encounter. Did the defendant ever ask for your name before placing you in handcuffs, Director? Bennett asked. He did not, Whitaker replied, deep baritone echoing through the silent room. He operated entirely on an assumption based on my race and my casual attire in an affluent neighborhood. He bypassed every procedural safeguard designed to protect the constitutional rights of the public. Tate stared at the table, face burning red, tears of profound shame and terror pooling in his eyes. And when you arrived at the precinct, did anyone attempt to rectify the situation? Bennett pressed. Whitaker's gaze slowly shifted to the gallery where former Sergeant Raymond O'Malley sat. O'Malley had accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Tate in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years for accessory to extortion. The environment at the precinct was one of absolute complicity, Whitaker stated firmly. The defendant operated with impunity because the system around him allowed it. It was a culture of arrogance that believed the badge was a shield against consequences. They were fundamentally incorrect. The defense did not even attempt to cross-examine the director. To question Harlan J. Whitaker on federal law or police procedure would have been procedural suicide. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the foreperson stood to read the verdict, Tate gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly his knuckles turned white. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On 14 counts of extortion under color of official right, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of federal racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. The words struck Tate like physical blows. He collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as quiet gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Martin Holloway, a stern man with zero tolerance for police corruption, looked down from the bench, expression entirely unsympathetic. "Mr. Tate," Judge Holloway boomed, voice dripping with disgust. "You were entrusted with the authority of the state. You were given a badge and a gun to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you used those tools to operate a criminal enterprise. You preyed upon the very citizens you swore to defend. Your actions are a cancer to the honorable profession of law enforcement. You targeted the director of the FBI through sheer prejudiced arrogance. And in doing so, you finally brought the light of justice to your dark extortion scheme. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 45 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down like a gunshot. Marshals moved in, pulling a sobbing Brandon Tate to his feet, snapping heavy chains around his wrists and waist. As he was dragged toward the side door, Tate looked over his shoulder one last time. Director Harlan J. Whitaker stood quietly in the front row, face completely impassive, watching the machinery of justice swallow the corrupt officer whole. A week later, Sunday morning returned to Bethesda, Maryland. The air was crisp, the sun rising over the manicured lawns of Elmwood Estates. Director Harlan J. Whitaker stood at the end of his long paved driveway once again, wearing his faded Georgetown sweatshirt and old sneakers, the green garden hose steady in his hands as cool water soaked the soil around his thriving hydrangeas. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, and genuinely peaceful. A new local police cruiser drove slowly down the street. It pulled to a stop near the curb. Behind the wheel sat a young, diverse officer from the newly reformed precinct. She rolled down the window and offered a respectful, professional wave. "Good morning, Director Whitaker. Beautiful day for the garden." Whitaker smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression of peace. "Good morning, officer. It certainly is. Keep up the good work out there." The cruiser rolled away, leaving him to the quiet comfort of his home. The system remained broken in many places, but Harlan J. Whitaker knew with absolute certainty that piece by piece he was helping to fix it. The storm had passed. The bad apples had been uprooted. Karma had not merely spoken, it had cleared the field with devastating precision. Brandon Tate had thought a badge made him invincible. He learned the hard way that true power lies in accountability and justice. He went fishing for an easy target and reeled in a 45-year federal prison sentence, losing everything he ever had. That is what happens when arrogance meets the immovable object of absolute justice.